Yeah, you want to stand up this way, up to this side here. And then you also want to bring the mic right up to you.
Yeah.
There you go.
Stand over here if that's all right. Just closer to the screen. Can everyone hear me? Just good volume. Thanks for coming out on a school night. Really appreciate your time. Sweet 16's going on, so clearly you're all Aggie fans instead of Longhorn fans because the Aggies are already out. But Houston plays later tonight. Is that the deal? Thanks again, Michael Earlbeck. Work with Epcor, and want to talk to you tonight about the Bayshore desalination facility that we're proposing to build on Galveston Bay. So we've got a website for the project up. We have a permit application in with the Texas Commission on Environmental Quality. Both of those are public. We'll have a link and a QRC code at the end, so feel free to go take a look at that. So we're here to just walk you through what the project is, and then we'll have some time to ask questions. Want to kind of respect your time. We only asked you for an hour tonight, so we'll try to keep to that as best we can. So yeah, welcome to Texas City. This is the old P.H. Robinson power plant site, and I realize the slides are kind of small for folks in the back, so I will do my best to just kind of explain what's on them. So we'll go to the next slide. So you guys know where you are, but this area of Texas, it's kind of, the state calls it Region H. They've broken up the state into 16 planning regions, and Region H is this Houston area. And of all the regions of the next 50 years, the Houston area needs more new wet water than any other region. It needs more than many regions combined. The number is about 800,000 acre-feet a year of new water supply after all of the water reuse and water conservation goals have been met. So that's a big number for the next 50 years. Typically, this area has been living on surface water, primarily the Brazos River and the Trinity River up north, but also local groundwater. A lot of local groundwater is here, it's fresh. The challenge with surface water is that it's not reliable in a drought. A lot of our rivers are over-appropriated. And the challenge with local fresh groundwater is over-pumping that does cause subsidence. And the last place you want to be along the coast is a bathtub, right? Because, yeah, we tend to get a lot of rain. I remember when 16 inches of rain was a big deal, and you guys had like 50 inches of rain in a day. So you kind of reset the record, reset the expectation of what Texas can do for us. So what we're looking to do is bring to the table a solution to provide reliable new water supply that's not tied to surface water, that's not tied to groundwater, but that's tied to ocean water. So that's what the real project is intended to do. So most of you, or many of you, probably know more about the history of the site than we do. And if you have good stories to tell, come see our team afterwards. We'd love to hear them. But the P.H. Robinson power plant, from what we can tell, was built in 1966 by what was then Houston Light and Power. NRG eventually took over the facility when he deregulated our energy market. Apparently, Hurricane Ike was really unkind to the cooling towers that did a lot of damage to where they could no longer meet their discharge permit. So NRG in 2008 made a decision to decommission that power plant and basically sell off the property. They kept a little bit of it off to the west side of the site. A local family investment office bought it as a potential investment opportunity in 2009, and it's just sat there ever since. And so it's fenced off, and yeah, so it'll move with us here. So in 2024, a couple years ago, Epcor approached the landowners because we saw the feasibility or viability of developing a water supply project on this old industrial site. The reason we like this site is because it was designed to move a lot of water. That power plant used cooling water, ocean water, so it's a once-through cool power plant. That's kind of older technology. The new natural gas generation units we use now don't use that technology, but somebody spent a lot of time and money digging a 2-mile intake channel and a 2-mile discharge channel to move a lot of water to cool that power facility. And it's already pre-disturbed. It's an old industrial site, so we're not having to go into a new area, greenfield, and create a lot of impacts by building a project. So last year in October, we submitted a discharge permit application to the Texas Commission on Environmental Quality. And they published that permit application, and when they draft that permit, they'll release it later on this year for public review and comment. The public comment period is now open. You're welcome to get online and submit your comments. And there will be additional public meetings and probably hearings later on this year that the state will do as part of the permitting process. So this is not your only opportunity to get questions answered and provide some feedback, but we're glad to be here tonight. So I want to walk you through the design approach because it's important to kind of understand what the project is and what the project isn't. When you look at a seawater desalination project, unlike surface water and groundwater, there are some environmental concerns with those projects, and typically they're in two categories. The first category is minimizing the impacts of the intake, because you're pulling in a lot of water, and you don't want to pull in a lot of marine organisms into your intake. And the second is really the discharge, because desalination projects, they take the salt out of the water and give fresh water for drinking, but they got to do something with the recovered salts. And typically that's discharged back into the ocean. A couple different ways to do that. I'll share with what our strategy is, but those are really the two primary environmental concerns when you're looking at a seawater desalination. The way you manage the intake impacts is you design your intake to operate at a very low velocity so that anything that can swim can escape the velocity and not get caught in your intake. And then also for the things that can't swim, you usually design for a very small screen size. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. On the discharge side, there's two ways to really do it. Down South Texas, there's several projects in Corpus Christi Bay that are being proposed. Almost all of those are using what they call diffusers. So they take the concentrate that comes out of the plant, they put underwater sprinklers, for lack of a better term, and jet that water and try to spread it out so that it gets incorporated into the salinity of the bay. That's not the solution we're using here. There's only two utility scale seawater desalination projects in the U.S. There's one in Tampa Bay and there's one in Carlsbad, California. Both of them are built at power plant sites, and both of them use what they call flow augmentation, which is they use the power plant's intake to that raw water that they're taking in, and they'll use a portion of that to mix with their concentrate before they discharge it, because it greatly reduces the salinity before it goes back into the ocean. So that's the strategy we're using here. Right now we're looking at about a 1-to-1 mixing ratio. So in general terms, when we're going to pull raw water out, the desalination technology will let us recover about half of that as product water, and the other half will have all the salts, and so it'll be about twice the saline of the raw water. We'll blend that with another unit of water so that before we even get into the outfall channel, we've already cut the salinity down. So in real numbers, the average salinity in Dickinson Bay, which is where our intakes channel is coming from, is about 14 parts per thousand on average. The average salinity in Galveston Bay, where the outfall channel is, up here by the tidal dam, is about 18 parts per thousand. So with our discharge on average, we're going to have about 21 parts per thousand is the salinity of our discharge for this project. So 21 parts per thousand on average, discharging into a bay that's about 18 parts per thousand. Any questions so far?
Isn't it an issue that it's so shallow all the way up and down the coast? I mean, we're having to go out 300 feet and we're not even having to worry about a 23-foot boat around it.
Yeah.
And so that's not much dispersion. And we've already gotten rid of most of the species of fish in Galveston Bay. And is this going to get rid of the last few that are there?
We don't think so, okay, but you're right. The Galveston Bay is shallow, obviously, except for the ship channel. And so your ability to mix that water into the system quickly is important. And so that's part of why we use this strategy instead of a diffuser. We just don't have the depths in Galveston Bay to be able to do that. We think this is a much better approach. When we discharge at the head of the outfall channel, there's still 2 miles of tidally influenced outfall channel that'll be naturally mixed before it even gets into Galveston Bay. And so we've looked at a 3-dimensional mixing model in Galveston Bay. I'll show you that in a little bit. We also had Pennsylvania and Galveston look at that. They basically took our project and put it into their existing 3-dimensional bay-wide mixing model. And I'll show you some of the results there.
So you don't think so?
Okay, let's wait on questions though. You finish your presentations and then we'll go into questions. So, because we want to be able to make it through the rest of the conversation. So,
there is, yeah, in theory, she's asking me to wait
Yeah,
till
let's
the
hold
end.
that
So
question.
Yeah, so you can
I'll
just
come back to that
give the
question.
whole presentation,
once we
because we
get
want
there.
to be able to hear everything, and we'll get derailed, and we'll be here really late. So we want to be able to answer everybody's questions.
Next slide. So when we look at the intake, it's important to look at kind of what we're proposing versus what was happening for 40 years at P.H. Robinson. So P.H. Robinson, again, they were using raw water for cooling. It was a much bigger system. Their average flow, their operational flow was about 1,200 million gallons a day, or 1.2 billion gallons a day. It was a lot of water. We are proposing only an intake of about 83 million gallons a day. So our project, when you look at what P.H. Robinson was doing, much, much smaller. A fraction of the volume will be coming in and out of the channels. But more importantly, we are going to reestablish circulation in the intake and the outfall channels. The flow velocity that NRG was operating ranged from 2 or 3 feet per second, which is not super fast, but it's pretty fast. When you look at organisms and swimming things, we're designing for a 1/2 foot per second intake flow velocity. That number is what they consider the best management practice for intakes in the U.S. for seawater and for power plants. It's kind of the lowest design criteria. But we're designing so that we have a very low intake flow velocity so that we're not pulling in fish into the intake. And then the mesh size, NRG's old screens were pretty large. It was about 1/2 inch or about 15 millimeters. We're designing our plant for 1 millimeter, so a much, much smaller intake screen size. So these are the design considerations that are included in the project, and we're doing this intentionally to minimize the impact we have from our intake and the operations of the project. Right now, it's important to know there's no interconnection between the intake and the outfall channel other than Galveston Bay. And every year we understand that there's fish kill events in the summer, temperatures get high, dissolved oxygen collapses, and fish suffocate. What we're going to be doing is kind of reestablishing connection and circulation through those channels. So on the intake channel, we're going to have about 83 million gallons a day going through there. It'll be a little bit of a current. And on the outfall channel, it'll be about 50 million gallons a day coming out across the tidal dam. So we're going to be eliminating that opportunity for those dead zones and those upper reaches of those channels for fish. Next slide. When we look at the idea of mixing this discharge of 21 parts per thousand on average, when A&M put this project into their Bay-wide mixing model, they concluded that the project would have a localized impact of only a couple parts per thousand, and it would dissipate within 1 or 2 kilometers to ambient salinity. Because we're pulling water kind of into Dickinson Bay, we're going to be pulling a little bit more Gulf of Mexico water in that area. So they are seeing a projected of about 1/10 to 1/2 part per thousand increase there in Dickinson Bay. Again, small but localized, but the ability of Galveston Bay, to your point, to diffuse and absorb this is very high. Both our model and Texas A&M's model are 3-dimensional models, which means they actually look at the salt water in the depth to make sure that it's not concentrating on the bottom. I don't have time to get into the studies here tonight, but I encourage you to go online and actually read our technical memo and read A&M's study to show that we have actually looked at this 3-dimensionally. We also asked A&M to look at this project's impact to critical species of fish, shrimps, oysters, and crabs. And what they did is they went and pulled up, the Parks and Wildlife Department has catch data in this area of the intake and the outfall, and they pulled 40 years of catch data, and they laid this out because when Parks and Wildlife goes out and does their surveys, they actually identify the species that they catch, the age of the species, what the temperature, the dissolved oxygen, the salinity was at the time they caught it, and the thin blue line is the range of salinities in which Parks and Wildlife has caught these species over the last 40 years. And it's not surprising that these species can tolerate a very wide range of salinity, including when we have a big rainfall event and Galveston Bay is essentially freshwater, but also in the summer in a drought when Galveston Bay is essentially like the Gulf of Mexico. It's mid-30s per thousand, okay? So what A&M then did is looked in the literature for all these species to identify what the critical salinity range is for the nursery value of Galveston Bay. So the importance of the bays in Texas is they're called nursery areas. And what that means is the shrimp and fish as adults have eggs, lay eggs out in the Gulf of Mexico, and as they hatch, basically they're food. And so they all swim like heck along the coast and get into the shallow parts of these bays and estuaries so they can get shelter, they can get cover, and they can kind of grow up. And then they eventually go back down into the Gulf of Mexico and self-develop. And so they call it a nursery because that's the value of having these shallow estuary embayments. And so what is that key salinity range, which optimal value for the nursery area? And that's what the numbers in the dark squares are. So for all the species, it's about 15 to 25 parts per thousand. For oysters, it's a little bit tighter, about 17 to 24 parts per thousand. That's the optimal salinity range for nursery areas. And so our average discharge is falling right down in the middle of that. And so when A&M looked at this project, again, you can go take a look at their report, they did not identify a significant negative impact to the fishery because of the project. So where we are in the process is Epcor has submitted a permit for the discharge, and TCEQ is processing that permit application. We expect them to come to the public sometime mid-year with a draft permit. You can actually see what they're proposing to issue for the project, and then they will be having public meetings for taking public comment on that draft permit. Right now, we're looking to start construction sometime in 2028. Maybe bring the facility online and start delivering water by 2031. That's the schedule. We are going to be providing a wholesale water supply to any customer that wants it, which means they're going to have to sign a contract with us for us to sign that water. So it'll be industrial or municipal customers, and what that means is we're not going to be putting water on the market into existing rates. It's not going to raise anybody's rates. If your water provider needs new water and they like our solution and we can compete well on price, then they'll contract with us. But this is not a project that's going to affect anyone's rates down here unless your water provider actually needs new water and they want to participate in the project. And then we'll see what that is. But so here's a QRC code for our project website. If you can't see that, it's just BayshoreWaterTX.com. That's BayshoreWaterTX.com. And then, of course, the TCEQ application, we'll leave this up on the screen if you want to come take a picture of the screen, and you're welcome to go and put your comments to TCEQ as they consider this permit application. So that's the standard briefing on the project, and be glad at this point if you want to
We're going to ask questions.
ask some questions.
We got some questions. Got a lot of questions. If you have more questions.
Can we open one or two of the doors in the back just to get a little more air?
Yeah, if we have more questions, then you guys can, you can come and write them up here since we're kind of asking. Okay, so you kind of started to cover this, is the water you plan to produce primarily for industrial or residential use?
If we can make it for both, and it'll depend on who the customers are, but we can make both municipal and industrial water supply from the project.
So my understanding was that you guys had already spoken with the Gulf Coast Water Authority for addressing that you guys could sell water to Bacliff. Is that the truth?
We have talked to several water providers in the area. Gulf Coast Water does provide water supply to a lot of you guys, but it's all under contract, which means they have an obligation to provide water at a fixed price. So they can't unilaterally increase your price of water without your approval. So if anybody, Gulf Coast Water or any of the other folks that we're talking to wants to buy water from us, it'll be an individual contract negotiation that they will then have to take to their ratepayers for approval. So.
And do you have an idea of how much you, okay, how much do you estimate this raw water will cost per 1,000 gallons compared to the current rates?
Everybody wants to know the question about price, and it's something we only really can get to once we have done a lot more diligence. We know that we have to be competitive with your other water supplies or with the folks down here. They have other water supplies, and we've got to compete with that on price. We're not at the point where we know what our price is going to be yet. We're still in a design phase. Obviously, we have a permit application that will have some conditions that we want to accommodate, but we'll be looking at pricing probably sometime in next year.
So, how has that looked exactly with the other plants that you guys have done? how has your water prices compared to the current prices? Did they go up, or did they go down, or did they stay the same?
It's not the most expensive water that we've sold.
But in comparison to that local area, did those people's water bills go up, or did they stay the same, or did they go down?
It all depends, yeah. We have project operations from Texas all the way up into Canada, so we're a North American company. So it really just depends which community you're in. And we do have water supply projects for industry, just industrial customers. The most recent is the big Samsung fabrication plant they're building in Taylor, Texas, in Central Texas. We're providing the industrial water supply and the industrial wastewater for that facility. So we do either municipal or industrial customers.
So on the coast, where you have the desalination plants, what does that water production cost look like?
So Texas does not yet have a seawater desalination
So
project.
in Florida and California is what I'm talking about.
Yeah, so those projects are not Epcor's projects.
Okay.
And so again, because we don't know our pricing, we're not sure where we fall within those two projects yet. Again, about next year, we should be ready to understand where we are with our pricing.
Okay, so there has been word that the plant was discussed over 2 years ago, and who in Galveston County, which officials have you been working with and speaking to, and for how long?
Back in 2024 is when we started looking at the project, and we started approaching elected officials and government officials early last calendar year, so kind of the beginning of 2025.
Okay, and who was that?
All the way from the governor's office down to county commissioner, county judge, and some other local city council folks in the area.
We don't have a city council in the Bayshore, so we only have MUDs. Those are our elected officials. So Texas City, which is not a part of this area, so Texas City had annexed parts of Bacliff.
Okay.
And so this area, our elected officials technically are Daryl Apfel, who is our commissioner, and then it is our MUD boards.
Okay.
So we don't have city council here.
Is Daryl here?
He's not, Daryl is not here. So, because it's important for us to understand who of our elected officials understood that this was happening. Because one of the main concerns that a lot of us have is, why are we just now finding out about this when there are many others who knew about this long before? And why was it that we were not informed of this sooner?
We are not very far along into the process. We only got approval from our board to submit the permit application in July 30th of last year. So we're only about 8 months into a decision to go ahead and proceed with the project. We made it public October 4th when we submitted the discharge permit application, and we did a lot of briefings just before that to make sure that a lot of folks locally weren't surprised. So, we're at the very beginning of this process to bring the project opportunity to the public and answer questions.
I think you're looking at a lot of people who are surprised. I'm not trying to be controversial. I'm just saying I think you're looking and talking to a lot of people who had no idea, and these are people who are active in our community. So I don't think that we were properly informed about this, and I talked with Galveston Daily about that, and that they ran that article. We have 2 newspapers here in this area that they would have been able to run that information so that our community would have been informed about this. So I think that's part of what the concerns are,
Sure.
because it doesn't feel transparent to some of us. So let me keep going with the question.
How many of you got a flyer, a mail flyer about the project, something in your mailbox?
Nope.
None of us.
One back there, okay. We did make an effort to inform the public beginning of October. That's when we decided to start talking about the project. Again, 60 days before, we were talking to some elected officials, so we've only been doing this since October. And look, my apologies if you feel left out.
We're on the water.
So, okay,
We're on the water, you think we get it?
so the next question is, if the state subsidized taking discharge and intake offshore, would Epcor consider that as an alternative to the proposal?
We would definitely consider that if the state wants to look at that.
How much consideration was given to taking intake and discharge offshore?
We are 18 miles from the Gulf of Mexico, and then you have to go another mile and a half offshore to get in the water deep enough to do that. So it's a 20-mile pipeline, which would be reasonable if the impacts of a discharge into the bay were significant and negative. But because we're not using diffusers, we're using flow augmentation, we're able to reduce the salinity of the discharge before it goes into Galveston Bay. A 20-mile pipeline is just not economically reasonable.
You give salinity, but at what,
Okay.
from shore and at what depth is that, are you establishing that salinity?
It's in the technical studies. I can't get into it tonight, but it's there. And it does three-dimensionally how far out.
Do you anticipate operating issues caused by sediment when pulled into the facility? And is it possible that the sediment from the bay water could contribute to operating issues and increased expenses? And if that comes to fruition, is it possible it may be more cost effective to do an intake and discharge offshore to limit the sediment intake at the facility?
Pre-treatment is what they call the sediment issue. Is the challenge on seawater desalination. The reverse osmosis membranes that actually separate the salt ions from the water molecules, they only work well if it's really filtered water. You have to have all the solids out. So it's really the pre-treatment system that you have to focus on and make sure that that really works. Even in the Gulf of Mexico, with winds, tides, and storms, you're going to have turbidity, you're going to have solids, you're going to have muds, you're going to have plankton, you're going to have a lot of solids in the water column. In the intake channel, we have the same challenge. We understand right now, and we're collecting more data right now, but we understand the range of what the solids in the water column are going to be, and we're designing our treatment system to be pretty robust to be able to handle that. So we don't expect that to be a challenge or a limitation on the project.
Will you use the existing inflow and outflow pipes, or will you be installing new ones? And are you anticipating dredging to be a part of this project?
We do not anticipate dredging is necessary. We've got three-dimensional surveys of the intake and the outfall channel. They're actually in pretty good condition. They're not showing any big evidence of sedimentation or siltation. So we don't expect dredging is going to be necessary. We are going to be using those channels the way they are, and we'll be kind of rebuilding NRG's old intake facility. So we'll be in their concrete, pulling out their intakes and building our new intakes.
How do you anticipate that this is going to be impacting the wetlands?
We don't have any wetlands on the site because we're going to be constrained and confined to where the old power plant was. NRG built that up. It's about 15 feet beneath sea level. We'll build it up another 3 feet and then build our plant. So this is all brownfield, pre-disturbed, no ecological resources there on the project site.
The permitting process, do you anticipate needing a 404 permit through USAID?
We do not. Because we're using an existing facility, we're not going to have impacts to navigable waters or wetlands.
Would you consider operating limitation in the permit to stop production during times of high ambient salinity in the bay?
We will certainly comply with any permit condition TCEQ wants to put on. So we know that the salinity in Galveston Bay can vary widely. When it's too fresh, it's not good for oysters, and when it's too salty, it's not good for fish, and I guess oysters as well. So it's pretty flexible right now. Because we are proposing to use flow augmentation, we can actually trim the salinity in times of those circumstances. So we can, if TCEQ wants us to increase the blending ratio during times of more salty water in Galveston Bay, or we can decrease it when there's too much fresh water. So we're going to have operational flexibility. It'll depend on what the regulator wants to make as a condition of the project.
Your website doesn't show where the desalination was taken from, how deep or how far from shore. I just looked at it.
All right. Are you planning to get a new permit for water rights or operate under an existing water rights permit?
We are expecting to operate under the existing NRG water rights permit. That's basically for 30,000 acre feet a year or 26.5 million gallons a day. Yes, we are a North American company. We're a little bit different than most companies. We are not publicly traded, although we disclose our financials as if we are. We are owned by one shareholder, and that's the city of Edmonton and Alberta. So we're a really unique company in the marketplace. At the core, we're owned by a city, and so we have a very strong municipal ethic.
Can you talk to us about what happens when the tide goes out? Our tide goes out anywhere between like 50 to 500 yards. And so over several weeks this happens every year. And can you talk to us about how this is going to impact that?
Yeah, so we're getting to know and understand the range of tide fluctuations, particularly when you have a low tide and a strong north wind. You can almost de-water the bay. So we're looking at the impacts of what that would do operationally on both the intake as well as the outfall. So it's part of the consideration that we're looking at for the project.
It's just plain beach.
The muddy beach, yeah, absolutely.
So who is paying for this project?
So Epcor is paying for the development of the project. If we have customers, when we have customers that sign, it'll be a performance-based contract, which means we agree to make water available according to the specifications they give us. Typically, that'll be drinking water, and then they'll agree to pay for it as we make it available. So it'll be a performance-based contract. The customers will pay for the water we make available. So
is there an amount that you top out at? Because like what happens if you're selling more, like if you pick up a bunch of contracts, right? Because of the area that we're in, then what happens if you're pulling in more, if you are needing to pull in more?
yeah, so there'll be a limit on the size of the project. If there's more demand in the area, other folks are going to have to come in with solutions. We'll be able to sell the 26.5 million gallons a day for the project. So we can't meet all of the need, but we think we can meet some of it.
And then what benefit does it actually serve this area to have this here if we're not guaranteed water? Because we're going to have to compete with everybody else. If there's a really short pipeline to to get us water here, and we're still, you're going to be selling to maybe larger companies or outside of this area or wherever, and we have this easy thing here for us, this easy resource, and then we don't have access to it in our area.
We would love to sit down and talk with your needs for new water supply, and if this makes sense. Again, we understand we're going to have to compete with your other options on the pricing, the terms and conditions, but if you're interested in being customers of the project, I'm the one to talk to. We'd love to sit down and talk with you. So we haven't excluded anyone right now. We're at the very beginning of this process, and we're talking to any folks that want to look at this as a potential water supply for the future. The value of the seawater desalination is that it's reliable even in a drought, and it doesn't lead to subsidence. So that has a value over some of the other options, but every customer is going to have to make their own value decision on whether what we're bringing fits for them or not.
Are there any tax incentives that Epcor is receiving?
No.
Doesn't this actually get charged by the electric companies to the residents?
I don't believe the electric companies can charge you for our project. We're going to have to buy power off the grid right there at the center point substation. So we're going to have to buy our own power and run our own plant and recover those costs in the price we charge for water.
How much water did you need?
So we're gonna, if you guys have questions, just come back here and ask, please. We're not taking questions from the audience. What partners are involved, such as like wildlife or TCEQ or EPA or any of these
Sure.
organizations?
So TCEQ is going to be our regulator, both on the drinking water side and also on the discharge side. They're not our partner, they're our regulator, so they write the rules. We have to comply with the permit conditions. We don't have other partners in the project right now, it's just Epcor. We're using different consulting engineering firms and contractors to answer questions and do work for us, but we're paying them for that. So right now we don't have partners in the project.
What happens if the permits don't go through?
What happens if the permits don't go through, then we don't build the project.
Alrighty. geographical area that you guys are going to be servicing or providing water to?
It'll depend on the customers. In Central Texas, we have one project that has a 142-mile pipeline that's 60 inches in diameter. So we know how to move water around because if there's a customer that needs it and can cover the cost to do that, we can deliver it. Here, until we know who the customers are and where they want the water delivered, we don't know, but we'll be able to, we'll be willing to either let them pick it up at the property boundary or be able to go ahead and deliver it to them. Every customer is going to be different.
Yeah, so are you planning on going outside of Galveston County?
I don't believe we are right now, no.
But in general? Like, is that a possibility? I think the concern would be, right, that there's resources that we have here, and so
Yeah.
we would like for our resources to stay here.
We would like the resource to stay here because it's the best unit price is the closest customers, right? The farther we go, the more expensive the water is. The reason we like this site is because we think it's in an area where there's real need for long-term water supply. So, but until we have customers, that's just a hunch.
How will this operation be affected by the severe storms and hurricanes, the pretty wild winds that we've been having?
Yeah, so we're gonna, in order to get insurance for the project, we're gonna have to design it to withstand the hurricane. So, hurricane force winds and storm surge. Right now, storm surge is going to be 16 and a half, 17 feet, I think, is what you have to design for. Our site's already at 15 feet. We're going to pull it up another 3 feet. So that's that design. And we're just going to build buildings that can handle high winds. So we don't have to design for wave energy because we're not out on the barrier islands. We're not having to take the brunt of those kind of storms. Power interruptions. So we'll have a backup power supply, elevation for storm surge, and then just designing all our facilities for wind.
So are you guys going to be paying like an industrial contract for the fire department? Not this fire department, but in Texas City? And then are they prepared to be able to take on like another large facility?
Yeah, so we'll need to work through the zoning and building permit code requirements for the facility. We've started those conversations, but yeah, whatever is needed for us to be able to build this facility here, there's not much that can burn in a seawater desalination, but you always have to have fire suppression built into the project, but that'll be primarily determined by local code, building code.
What chemicals do you guys use within the plant itself, like for cleaning afterwards and things like that? There's a major concern about what the sludge is and what, not just what you're putting back out into the bay, because it's not just salt, right? There's a lot of garbage that comes along with that. And there's sludge that happens, and so when you have to clean that,
so if I come back with a t-shirt that says sludge happens, then, it'll be because of her. Yeah.
I'll accept it.
So because, remember when I said that TCEQ is also going to be our regulator on the drinking water side? Once we get past the intake screens, every material we use from that point forward and every chemical we use has to be rated for drinking water approval, which means if it finds its way into a drinking water system, it's safe. So the chemicals we're going to be using are the same chemicals you're using for your traditional surface water treatment plant or a groundwater project. The regulator requires us to use materials that are called NSF certified. Basically, they're safe for public consumption. With the discharge, the solids that we'll filter out, we're going to dispose of those to landfill. So that's actually not going to be in the discharge. The discharge is going to be clearer and a little bit saltier, but it won't have the solids. So all of the solids are going to be taken to landfill.
And what is the smell of the sludge?
The landfill will be managing the smell of the sediment. Yeah, so
So as it's coming out of y'all's facility, right? One, who is taking that? Is it Bacliff that is going to be expected to take that? Is it Texas City who's expected to take that? And then what does that pay rate look like for whoever is moving that stuff along?
Sure. So part of our operation is we're going to have to build into our budget the cost of taking our sludge to a licensed landfill. So that'll just be part of our operation cost. These water treatment plants, they are not loud and they don't smell. This is not a wastewater plant where you have digesters and those kind of organics going into the atmosphere. You're not going to hear it. You probably won't see it. and you're not going to smell it. Water treatment plants are pretty clean, low-impact community types of facilities.
What is the temperature of the discharge?
It'll be the same temperature as the ambient water. So whereas NRG was taking salt water, heating it up, they were evaporating off a lot, so it was warmer and a little bit saltier than what the raw water is. Our water's going to be the same temperature, it's just going to have a little bit more salt.
And then, how is the marine life going to be protected? Like, how are you going to ensure? Because nothing ever goes as planned, right? And so we hope that things go the way that you guys are proposing, but the reality is that it probably won't, because everything always changes around here. And so we want to know, what are you guys going to do? Because the bay is very fragile. We have dolphins, we have shark, we have lots and lots of fish life.
Right.
And so what is going to happen to be able to keep this area?
Sure. So TCEQ, based on our studies and modeling that were required for the permitting, based on Texas A&M's independent studies, and based on the public comments and the testimony of folks down here, they're going to draft a permit with special terms and conditions. That permit is renewed every 5 years. And so every 5 years, the state's going to come in and look at how the project's performing versus how it was permitted. Originally, when NRG built the facility, they didn't have to cool the discharge. And at some point, under one of those 5-year renewals, TCEQ said, you know what, that's just too hot of water. If you want to continue operating the plant, you have to build a cooling tower. And so they built, subsequent to originally building the project. So everyone in Texas who has a discharge permit goes through a 5-year renewal on that permit to make sure that what was envisioned at the beginning is actually happening during the operation. So.
Alrighty. Okay. Trying to make sure I'm not getting the sentiment of all of these together. How many workers will you be producing? Not for the building part of that, but for the actual maintenance of the facility itself?
Yeah, so construction is going to be somewhere between 30 and 36 months. Americus Mitchell with Epcor, he's going to be part of the delivery team, so he has to keep all the promises I made tonight. So if I see him shaking his head, then I'm underestimated. But it'll be about a 3-year build process. We'll have a couple hundred people building the project. Once it's under operations, probably 10 to 20, maybe 25 operators on site, 24/7, fences, security, just to keep the plant running. So it's not going to be a big impact from a traffic standpoint. During construction, obviously, we'll have trucks in and out of there, but once it's up and running, figure maybe up to 30 folks.
How does the current contamination of the bay affect your operation, and will it affect the water that is coming out, like that you guys are doing?
Yeah, so water contamination is becoming a big deal. Flint, Michigan, PFAS, microplastics, endocrine inhibitors, and all of the things in the water supply. That the more science we have, the more we're able to see that. By far, the treatment technology used for all of those items is reverse osmosis. RO is the finest treatment system. The membranes are designed to just let water molecules through, and it kind of rejects anything bigger than water molecules. So if you're dealing with PFAS, microplastics, all of those things, you'll be using reverse osmosis. So whatever's in the raw water, whatever's in Galveston Bay, we know that we're going to be able to pull it out, and we'll have regular reporting to TCEQ to make sure we're constantly meeting drinking water standards, just like your current water systems and your wastewater systems. So,
what are the specific chemicals that are used to clean the reverse osmosis system itself? Most of us have those in our house.
yeah.
Right? So, and somebody comes out and cleans that for us and whatnot. What is the chemicals that you guys are using, and what are you going to do with those chemicals?
Yeah, so part of those chemicals get into your drinking water system because it's part of your disinfection to make sure it's safe and doesn't have, viruses and bacteria. Other processes, some of it will go out in the sludge, and other parts will go out in the discharge. But again, everything we're using, all the chemicals we're using are rated safe for public consumption because this is a drinking water system. So I can get a list of the specific water treatment chemicals It'll be very similar to what you guys are using in traditional water treatment plants, with just a little bit of different ones for the RO.
Do you have presently any customers here? And if you do,
We do not have any customers signed up. We are at the very beginning of this process. We are beginning to talk and have been talking with some folks that are interested. Obviously, they want to know what you want to know, which is what's it going to cost? And not able to share that until we get a little bit farther on in the process. So we don't have any customers right now. We are talking with folks that are thirsty and looking for options for new water supply. So now is a great chance to talk with us if you feel like you guys want to be considered a customer of the project.
what ways will Epcor be supporting Dickinson ISD since that's the school district in that area? I'm sorry.
Yeah. We typically, once we have a project in a community, we typically become a pretty good member of those communities. This project will be very similar. Because our owner is a municipal city itself, we are a little bit of a different company when it comes to community engagement, community outreach. I'll let Matt, who's kind of directs a lot of that, talk with some of you afterwards. If you have specific questions about that, Matt's the right guy to talk to. But we do plan on engaging the community if we're successful in the project.
Given that UTMB Galveston's model range for acceptable salinity is 15 to 25 parts, how will adding the water that's baseline is almost that of the maximum not negatively affect the marine life because it's at the higher end?
Yeah, so on average, we're about 21 parts per thousand. The range is 15 to 25. So again, you guys know better than me, salinity changes almost hourly, daily out there. There's a lot of fluctuation and variability. We are not outside the optimal range for larval recruitment. So we feel like the project is pre-mitigated to make sure we're minimizing the impacts that we're going to have on the system.
21 parts.
You guys have a lot of questions. This is good.
Yes.
Really good. I thought I'd be bored of this.
Yeah, we do love the bay.
So sorry.
21 parts PPE. 21 PPE. Is there a buildup?
There is not a buildup. Yeah.
Glad you knew that. We are the ones that are going to incur risk for the bay. So what is in this for us in this area?
What's for the immediate area is we're going to, after 16 years of stagnant water in those intake and outfall channels, we're going to reestablish flow. It's not going to be the scale that NRG operated, but we're going to start a current in those intake and on the outfall. And I would guess the tidal dam is going to get a lot more popular for fishing because you're going to have a constant sustained flow that'll be a little bit clearer than what's in the bay because we've taken out some of the solids. And you're not going to have those saline, heat, hypoxia events with fish kills up in the channel. So that's part of what you're going to get out of this is we're going to reestablish current in that 4 miles of channels.
In Tampa, the plant that was there, they experienced issues with membrane clogging. Why is your design expected to be better?
Yeah, so with the Tampa Desal project, from my understanding, the contractor used a pretreatment filter that wasn't piloted, and that decision turned out to be quite poor. It didn't perform the way it needed to, and they had to go in and rebuild the pretreatment system to something that could handle the sediments. So, from that standpoint, that risk is on Epcor. We're going to have to design something and hold to our price regardless of what happens. TCEQ, as a drinking water regulator, they're going to require us to pilot our treatment system for 6 months consecutively to make sure that we can meet drinking water standards for 6 months. And that'll include our pretreatment system. So we're going to already have a test, probably start late this year and go into next year, where we'll have some skid-mounted rental equipment out there on site, bring some power in, and we're actually going to start treating water at 50 gallons per minute, pretty low flow. But we will know and have real data of what our selected treatment system can actually do with that raw water.
And where is that happening at?
It'll be at the PH Robinson plant. It will be right there on site.
So in 6 months, you guys are gonna be up and running.
No, so piloting. So
Right, so where is
piloting.
that happening?
What's that?
Where is that happening?
It'll be happening at the site right there in between the intake and the outfall channel.
Okay. You said that A&M did this study, and what's the reason why you didn't choose any other college or organization such as Galveston Bay Foundation or anywhere else that may have a stakeholder in the Bay?
Yeah, so we wanted an institution that had academic understanding of this estuary system, and so that's why we used Galveston Bay Foundation. Texas A&M Galveston. We did sit down with Galveston Bay Foundation, brief them on the project before it went public. We gave them a tour of the site. We did the same with CCA. We did not want those folks being surprised, and so 60 days before we went public in October, we did talk with those folks. They're currently looking at the project. I think some of those folks are doing their own independent study before the public comment period closes, so they're going to have their own data, which we welcome. If you've got more science to look at this project, that's something we want to see as well. So they're looking at it, and I'll let them speak for themselves on what they think of the project.
In light of Alberta, Canada, and oil sands region, are local refineries an option for your project?
Any industrial customer that's looking for reliable water supply is a potential customer. We'd love to talk with them.
All right. If the waste is not safe to go back into the bay, how is it safe to add it back into a landfill? Please help us understand.
So it's not waste. Basically, when you filter out the solids that are in the water column, it's going to be a combination of fine muds, sands, grains, and then gunk. Algae, phytoplankton, zooplankton, whatever's, take a cup of water out of Galveston Bay, and all the stuff that you see, that's got to come out because it's solids. So that's what we'll be filtering out and then hauling to a landfill.
Bacliff storm drain systems connect to those canals. What effects will this have on your system and our drain performance? Storm drain performance.
Yeah, we don't expect any impact from storm drains or existing intakes or existing outfalls. We know that those are there, and there's no incompatibility with the project.
Is there any way to use this salt that you guys are on at?
Yeah, now, so the idea here is because we're going to go to the effort of concentrating marine salts. Some of those are pretty important, like lithium and all those kind of things. If somebody wants to come and take that and concentrate it further and make it solids, I've got something I can let you use, right? But yeah, so mineral recovery is this idea of taking the minerals out of a concentrate from a desal plant. It's a great idea. I don't know, Tom, if anyone's able to pull it off yet commercially at scale. The challenge is it's really expensive to get that last bit of water out of those salts. And you just can't, with what's left, you can't make enough money to recover your cost there. But the idea is out there, and there's a couple people playing around with it.
And can you go back and just talk a little bit more about the plan to get energy to run to the plant?
Yeah, so we're going to have to buy power to run our facility. Right now, CenterPoint, obviously this plant put power on the grid across the fence. We're just going to take power back off the grid there off the fence. And then we'll have, TCEQ will require us to have some amount of redundancy backup power supply. So we'll have an emergency gas generator on site. So if we lose power, not that that ever happens down here, we'll be able to still operate for a period of time.
Would you guys be open to, would Epcor be open to an advisory board of community members and not necessarily politicians, but the community itself?
We would be open to a community advisors, absolutely, yeah.
Have you already purchased the location?
We have not. We've optioned the property. We control the site. Yeah, but we haven't actually acquired it yet. But we control the site. We can when we're ready.
Everyone here knows most people that live on the Bayshore Drive, San Leon, Bacliff, Bayview, pay most. We pay quite a bit for taxes. This is just this. And for utilities, would we be required, or would there be something passed on to us in the form of taxes to support this project?
No, we're a private company, I can't tax you. The only way you're gonna pay for the project is if your water provider decides that our water supply is the best deal economically and signs a contract with us. So other than that, you guys aren't gonna cover any of the costs.
How will the plant affect our property values?
I am not an appraiser. So what I do know is that industrial site, almost 1,000 acres, has been vacant for 16 years. If somebody gets in there and cleans up a lot of it and puts it to functional use, eliminates the attractive nuisance of people jumping a fence and doing all kinds of things back there, I don't know, I would view that as an improvement to the overall community, but again, I'm not a tax appraiser.
All right, I think that we need to, okay, I think we have reached the end.
Thank you. We came a long way, and you guys made it worth it. I really appreciate the
Hold on.
time and the attention. Oh, not Tony.
I know, sorry. There's always one more question per minute down these, so we always got each. Think about contingency plans. Do you have contingency plans if something goes awry, whether it's on land or in the channel or Galveston Bay?
We do, yeah. So part of the value of this site is our intake's not right there at the ocean. We've got 2 miles. And at the flow rates we're talking about, we're going to have a travel time of maybe 1 to 2 days for that molecule of water in Dickinson Bay to actually get to our intake. So we're going to actually have, obviously we'll be doing monitoring on the raw water side. We're going to have a lot of time to actually deal with or shut down the plant if we have like an oil well blow out in the Gulf, if that never happens, if we have a tidal event or a red tide event. So part of the uniqueness of this site, because it's located essentially so far inland, cut channels, it gives us a lot of operational time to be able to address anything that may be in the water coming up into the plant that could hurt the plant or make the water unsafe.
What is the status of the cooling tower that caught fire in 2025?
I understand they're all burned to the ground, yeah.
And then, what is the reason you're using a permit from 2003 rather than updating?
Yeah, so in Texas, when you get a surface water right from the state, that actually goes with your property. And so when you sell a property, that's a property right, that water right goes with the property. So that's part of the purchase for Epcor. If we do this project and buy the property, we will get the water right. So that's just the way surface water rights work in Texas.
And then what are your plans for, like, if you receive hurricane damage and whatnot? Because this is, I mean, we get nailed for stuff here. Because we get the brunt of stuff. So what's your guys' plan for that? Because if you're providing a bunch of water, right, we had an issue where people went without water. We were very lucky in that.
Right.
But there's a lot of areas where they really struggled for a long time.
Yeah, we've seen ice storms take out water supply systems. We've seen hurricanes do it. Typically, it doesn't really damage the water treatment plant. It takes your power down. And it takes you, once you lose pressure in your distribution system, you're having to do boil water notices. So part of our redundancy is we're going to build our site high so storm surge doesn't flood us. And then our backup water power generation will make sure that we can keep running long enough for the power to get back up. So those are things that you typically go through from a design standpoint. And then of course you always have insurance for things that you just can't control, depending on how big of a storm hit and what all goes down during that event.
Was this process figured in the plan, figured into the 100-year flood mitigation plan that we have?
I don't believe this project would be included in that because we are, again, at the very beginning and this is relatively new.
So how is that going to affect our flooding issues? Because we have a current plan for flood mitigation, and if it doesn't include a rise in and shed from a facility, how is that going to affect us?
I don't think we're
We
going to
have to
be.
do a study on that.
Yeah,
That would be pertinent.
Yeah, that's, again, the intake and the outfall channels are at sea level, so those are going to go up and down with the ocean. We'll be working on a site that's already high, so we're not going to be contributing to flooding from like runoff or anything like that. But yeah, I don't think the 100-year flood plan has looked at this facility.
Okay, and then if you don't own the property, then how are you able to use the water rights?
We can't use the water rights yet. We would only get the water rights if we acquire the property.
So then what are you going to be using in 6 months?
The current landowner is going to let us use their permit for us to run our pipeline.
And then what is the connection that's to Bacliff mud?
Yeah, so TCEQ again regulates the drinking water side and they regulate the discharge side. So we've got a permit application with TCEQ for the discharge of the full facility. When we do our pilot, we're going to take 50 gallons a minute. We're going to separate the solids. We're going to separate the salts. We're going to show we can meet drinking water quality. Once we do that, we're going to combine it all back together and discharge it. TCEQ considers that also a discharge that we also need a permit for, which is their interpretation of the rules, which is fine. So what we're working with is to see if Bacliff Mud is willing to accept that 6 months worth of discharge. We're offering to build whatever equipment they need to make sure that they don't violate their permit from a flow and quality standpoint, so they're not out any money. But if they can accommodate helping us out for that 6-month process just by taking the recombined seawater for our pilot, then that's currently what we're talking to them about. I think Americus has been down at some of the Bacliff Mud public meetings talking about that proposal.
Are you going to be updating the pumps and valves that have been sitting? And like, are there?
There's a lot of rust on those facilities, yeah.
Yeah.
We're going to be able to use the site, the engineered fill, and the elevation, but we're going to pull out almost all the concrete and steel and put new in. It's just pretty well corroded. I mean, it's, what is it, 60, 70 years old in some places, yeah.
So are you having like an environment, like have you guys done like because you have not done this before, have you looked at the other 2 plants in the United States and looked at the environmental impact on those areas and then kind of thought about how that is going to actually, in real practical ways, right? There's zero way that you're going to say to me or any of these people that this is not going to affect us in some way. There is no possible way. You build a house and there is a impact, right? There's a change that is going to happen. And so the goal of this is transparency. And so how can we weigh the cost, benefit analysis of y'all being here if we don't know what that is because you keep telling us that it has no real effect or it's not going to do anything. It must do something.
Sure.
What is that something? How will it affect our bay and how will it affect our area here, our flooding? How does this affect us so we can actually understand that? Because we can go to Florida and we can go and ask them and we can go and have a nice conversation with their locals and find out all of those things, but we would rather hear it from you because we're trying to make a good informed decision, and if the goal is transparency, let us hear that.
Sure. Absolutely. We're, again, at the beginning, I know you guys feel like you're coming in late on this. That's our fault, but we are at the beginning of the process. Our teams have been to the project in Florida. Other parts of our team have been to the Carlsbad project. We've got consultants and experts that have worked on both of those projects, advising us and walking us through this process. So we are working to make sure that the project has a minimal impact as possible, but can provide new, reliable water supply. Again, you can go pump more fresh groundwater and bring that in, but you're going to cause subsidence. You can try to get more surface water if it's available, but it's not going to be reliable in a drought. So, you know, with every new water supply, there's these trade-offs of what the impacts are, what the cost is, how reliable is it. We're going to have to compete in that space to make sure we can bring to market an affordable and environmentally acceptable project. But it'll be up to our customers to decide if we're successful on that. So, yeah. Yeah, so we don't have time. I would encourage you to go online to our project site, read A&M studies, and let them speak for themselves. A&M modeled this in a three-dimensional way. They looked at the fate not only in the project area, but also all of Galveston Bay. What they're showing that just by recreating circulation, you're going to attenuate some hypersalinity during the summer months just by having water moving around. Some of their modeling shows salinities in lower Galveston Bay improving by a tenth of a part per thousand because of the project. Just because you have circulation and you're moving water around in the summer. So again, it's a lot more detail than we can go through here, but I want you to, encourage you to go read through that, and then as we continue working through this public process, if you have other comments and questions, you guys know how to find us, and you actually know that we'll show up to a meeting. So,
what is the effect going to be, or have you guys considered what will happen when the ice cycle is like? I mean, it's going to take a while for it to be completed, but
yeah.
once they start that process and the aqueduct gets closed, right? And you're shooting water out, and then it's not going out anymore.
Yeah. There's a lot of things that the aqueduct is going to do, and there's a lot of questions that people have about what the impacts are that we don't have answers yet. We're kind of in that same boat. What is the new modeling of the bay circulation with the dike versus without it? So there's a lot of questions we all have, and first and foremost is that project going to happen, and if so, when?
Online, I could not find where the desalination numbers came from, how far out from shore or
Okay.
deep.
So where our salinity numbers came from, I understand your question now. The state has both basically buoys and data points in the bay. TCEQ manages this. Some are historic data, some are actually up and running, giving you data. So we pulled all the historic data from all of the buoys that are in the intake area and in the outfall area, because we wanted to characterize what are the salinities in the outfall area and what are the salinities in the intake area. Obviously, in Dickinson Bay, it gets a little bit more fresh runoff from Dickinson Bayou, and so those numbers are usually lower from a salinity standpoint than Greater Galveston Bay. So that's why our average intake is about 14 parts per thousand. In Galveston Bay, where we're discharging, it's about 18 parts per thousand.
So none of those buoys are near the shallow water along the coast, which is where we'll be affected.
There's a map of the buoys where we got the data in our technical report. So,
They're not along the coast.
well, they're not in
They're
on the
out
coast.
further, they're out
Yeah.
further.
There's several in Galveston Bay that we're using.
Not near the coast. It's very shallow.
I understand.
That's where the impact's gonna be. That's my,
Yeah,
that's,
yeah. We're using the best information that is available about what is the historical salinity. So you're right. There's not buoys right there past the tidal dam, because a lot of times that's just a mud flat. They have to go far enough out to Galveston Bay where you have several feet of water to be able to actually collect the water quality.
well, that's
So,
a concern that the fish are gonna be all dead along that, the shallow part where it's salination's gonna be headed.
yeah.
You know, it doesn't, I don't really care what's out in the middle of the bay.
Yeah.
What's out at the end of my pier.
Sure. What we know is that none of the organisms in Galveston Bay are going to die at 21 parts per thousand salinity, right? That is in their range. They're tolerant. You can catch them all day long in that salinity range. There's other factors that are limiting fisheries, but it's not that you have, mid-20s parts per thousand
You just
salinity.
said those numbers came from the center of the bay.
Not the center,
The
along the
buoys
coast.
are,
Again,
not in near shore where all of our piers are,
Yeah.
and where our fishing is.
yeah, but it's within a couple hundred feet or so of those data buoys. Again, we have a map online. I apologize I didn't put that on the screen.
So, we have one last question, and then we're gonna wrap up so that everybody can go home, because we still have one more day left out of the week. But my daughter wants to know, is this going to be affecting, because you're bringing several hundred people to work here, is that going to be changing our small community? And have you thought about the impact that will have on the area?
Yeah, so this is a very big area. There's a lot of construction that's always going on. You're probably not going to feel our construction from the short amount of time and the number of people we have Certainly, once we're under operations, there's only going to be about 20 or 30 employees that we'll have at the project. Again, you're not going to see a whole lot of new traffic or changes in the community from the project.
Perfect.
Are you doing hire local if you can?
Hire local, that's what I was gonna say, can you hire local?
We tend to hire local, yeah. All of our projects, this is too far for a commute from Austin. So for all of our projects, we'll bring in kind of a key operator, a key maintenance tech, and then we'll hire from the local community. So if you have folks that have water operators license or want to get water operators license and come talk to us, let us know.
All right, so